Hi, welcome back. In this video, we are going to go more in depth into counting. In particular, we're going to learn about a concept called subdivision. So to understand this, let's first take a look at a whole note, right? And we had mentioned before that you can divide a whole note into two half notes. In other words, two half notes, one half note plus a half note, equals a whole note. And by the same token, you can divide a half note into two quarter notes. In other words, a quarter note plus a quarter note, two quarter notes, equals the length of a half note. And we can continue in this pattern. We can divide a quarter note into two eighth notes. An eighth note plus an eighth note equals a quarter note. And we'll take this one level further. We can divide an eighth note into two 16th notes. I'm going to draw two beams here. So a 16th note, one flag, two flags, plus another 16th note equals 1/8 note. If you need to slow down the videos, feel free to do that, or rewind to rewatch anything that you might not understand. Okay, so now let's take a look at how to count this. We've already done a little basic counting together. Let's change the color here for visibility. So let's say that the time signature is 4/4, meaning that there are 4 quarter notes per measure. If I have just quarter notes in a measure, I'll just count each one as a quarter note. 1, 2, 3, 4, since we're counting quarter notes. We know we're counting quarter notes as the beat because the bottom number is a 4. If I have half notes, I'm still going to count quarter notes. So that means that this half note is 2 quarter notes, 1-2, and this half note is 2 quarter notes, 3-4. And when I clap it, I'll hold my hands together. 1, 2, 3, 4. If I have a whole note, that's 4 quarters, so I'm going to write and count 1-2-3-4. So the whole note would be played 1, 2, 3, 4. If I try the whole line, it sounds like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's say, for example, that my time signature changes. Let's say that I go to 6/8 time. In 6/8 time, now we have 6 eighth notes per measure. We're going to be counting each eighth note as one beat. So in this first example, let's say that I have 6 eighth notes like we did in the other video. We'll count this as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But now let's say that we have longer note values. So let's say maybe we have a quarter note and then an eighth note. And then let's say an eighth note and then a quarter note. Well, there are 2 eighth notes per quarter note, just like we saw up here on this chart. 2 eighth notes in one quarter note. Because we're counting each eighth note as one beat, well, now that means the quarter note has 2 beats since there are 2 eighth notes per quarter note. So that quarter is now 1-2. This eighth note is 3. This eighth note is 4. And this final quarter note is 5-6. So that measure is going to sound like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Feel free to rewind that a few times and try that with me. Okay. Now, sometimes in music, we have to use another technique of counting known as subdividing. Subdividing. Okay. And to subdivide or subdivision is the process of counting notes that are shorter than a single beat. Let me give you an example. Let's say we are in 4/4 time, so that means there are 4 quarter notes per measure. But in this case, instead of just quarter notes, now I have eighth notes. I'm going to add my beams to make these all eighth notes. Remember, there are 2 eighth notes per beat, 2 eighth notes per quarter note. You'll also notice the way I beamed it. I've beamed this as a group. This is group 1, beat 2, beat 3, and beat 4. I did not connect them all together like this. See, I didn't make one long beam to connect all the eighth notes. Composers do this so that music is easier to read in terms of their beat divisions. You can see the beat groups. So there are 4 beat groups here. The first eighth note will be beat number 1. The second beat group is beat 2, the third is beat 4, and the third is beat 3, and then the fourth is beat 4. But what do we say? What can we say when we count these eighth notes in between? I'm drawing a plus sign, but we're going to say the word and every time you see a plus sign. So it sounds like this: 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And I'm clapping every single one of those notes because we're going to be playing or singing every single one of those notes. Let's try that again. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. This is subdividing. Anytime you are counting notes that are smaller than a beat. So let's make this a little bit more complicated, staying in 4/4 time. Let's say we have a rhythm like this: quarter note, eighth, 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 quarter note, bar line. This first quarter note is beat 1. This beat group here, if you look here, this is a beat group 1, this is beat group 2, beat group 3, and beat group 4. 2 and 3 and 4. Now, what we're also going to do is we're going to fill in the ands for beats 1 and 4. This is called subdividing. Because even though it's not written, we know that that quarter note is actually equal to 2 eighth notes, and the same for beat 4. Okay? So let's try clapping this together. We're not going to clap on the pink ands because those are just subdivided. We're actually just holding the quarter notes out there. But we're going to still count it like this: 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Try that again. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And we have one more thing to learn in this video. Sometimes music notes have a dot after them. A dot. Sometimes they might be a half note with a dot, which is known as a dotted half note. We might have a dotted quarter note. We might have a dotted whole note. We might have a dotted eighth note, or even a dotted 16th note. Sometimes And we're not going to get into detail here. We might even have a double dotted note. But let's figure out what this dot means. Okay? The dot is just a way of saying this. The note plus half of its note. Okay? So what's half of a half note? Well, if we take a look up here at our chart, if you divide a half note in half, you get 2/4. That means half of a half note is 1/4. Now check this out. Another way of thinking of this is this. A half note equals 2/4 notes. The dot equals half of the half note, which is also a quarter note, which means that a dotted half note is equal to 3/4 notes. So let's say that you had a time signature of 4/4, and you had a dotted half note followed by a quarter note. The dotted half note equals 3/4. So we're going to play 1, 2, 3, and then the final quarter will play on beat 4. Let's try that together. 1, 2, 3, 4. Like that. Now sometimes you might have an example where you're dealing with a dotted quarter note. We do this the same way. Another way of representing a dotted quarter note is dividing the quarter note into 2 parts, which means we're dividing it into eighth notes. And the dot is half of the quarter, which is also an eighth. So it means that a dotted quarter note is equal to 3/8 notes. But this is where it gets a little bit tricky. How do we count this? Let's say that we are in 4/4 time again. Let's say that we have a dotted quarter followed by an eighth note and then followed by 2 more quarter notes and a bar line. So we now know that this dotted quarter note is equal to 3/8 notes. So I'm going to do this in pink. I'm going to subdivide. 3/8 notes is the first dotted quarter. Okay, I'll just connect it like this for ease. Then we have another eighth note here. And then we can subdivide these 2 last quarter notes into 2 more eighth notes, like this. Well, how would we count that? Well, that's pretty easy. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. The only difference is we're going to hold that first dotted quarter, and then we're going to hold beat 3 and beat 4 because they're quarters. So this is the subdivision. We're subdividing this more complicated rhythm into something that's easier to understand. Let's try clapping and counting this example. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Thank you. That concludes our video on our introduction to subdivisions and dotted notes. I'll see you in the next video.